In part 1, we watched an idea catch fire. The nation was born in revolutionary France and carried across Europe on flags, songs, and dreams. But by 1848, those dreams had hit a wall. The great liberal revolutions had failed. Kings still sat firmly on their thrones. So how did Germany and Italy, which did not exist as countries, finally become real nations? The answer is surprising. They were not united by idealistic dreamers armed with poetry and pamphlets. They were forged by hard-nosed politicians using armies, wars, and cold calculation. In this part, we follow that transformation. We will watch Germany and Italy stitched together by force. We will see the slow and very different birth of Britain. We will learn how artists gave the nation a human face. And finally, we will see how nationalism curdled into something darker, helping to drag the world toward its First World War. After 1848, something important shifted. Nationalism drifted away from democracy and revolution. Instead, it was picked up by conservatives, the very people who had once feared it. They used national feeling to build state power and dominate Europe. Nowhere is this clearer than in Germany. Remember the Frankfurt Parliament, where middle-class liberals tried to unite Germany peacefully. That attempt was crushed by the monarchy, the military, and the powerful Prussian landowners known as the Junkers. After that failure, leadership passed to the Kingdom of Prussia and to one extraordinary man. His name was Otto von Bismarck, the chief minister of Prussia. Bismarck was the architect of German unification, and he had no patience for speeches and parliaments. He believed nations were built by power, not by persuasion. His chosen tools were the Prussian army and an efficient state machine. His method was war, and he pursued it without apology. Over 7 years, Bismarck led Prussia into 3 wars, against Denmark, against Austria, and against France. Each one ended in a crushing Prussian victory. With every war, more German territory was pulled together under Prussian leadership. Think about what that really means. The liberals of 1848 had tried to build Germany through debate, voting, and a written constitution, and they had failed. Bismarck built it instead through soldiers, cannon, and battlefield victories. The same goal was reached, but by the opposite road. The story reached its climax in January 1871. In a grand ceremony, the Prussian king, William I, was proclaimed German emperor. The location was chosen to humiliate the defeated. It was the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles, deep inside France. Germany was born not in a parliament, but in an enemy's palace, surrounded by soldiers. The new Germany bore Prussia's stamp from the start. The state modernized its currency, its banking, and its legal system, with Prussian methods becoming the model for the whole nation. A country had been created, but it had been built by the army and the state, from the top down. Like Germany, Italy was a land divided. For centuries, it had been scattered across 7 different states. Only one of them, Sardinia-Piedmont, was ruled by an Italian princely house. The north was held by Austria, the center by the Pope, and the south by the Bourbon kings of Spain. Even the Italian language had no single standard form. Italy's unification is really the story of 3 very different men. The first you already know, Giuseppe Mazzini, the passionate revolutionary. In the 1830s, he dreamed of a unified Italian republic and founded his society, Young Italy. But his revolutions failed, and the dream needed a new path forward. That path ran through the kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont and its ruler, King Victor Emmanuel II. The real genius behind him was his chief minister, Cavour. Cavour was no revolutionary and no Democrat. He was a shrewd politician who, oddly enough, spoke better French than he did Italian. Through a clever diplomatic alliance with France, he defeated the Austrians in 1859. Then came the third man, and the most colorful of them all, Giuseppe Garibaldi. He came from a family of coastal traders and had once been a sailor. After joining Mazzini's movement, he was forced into exile in South America, where he learned the art of guerrilla war. He returned to fight for a united Italy. In 1860, Garibaldi led a force of armed volunteers, famous for their red shirts, into southern Italy. This was the legendary Expedition of the Thousand, and fresh volunteers kept joining until their numbers swelled to about 30,000. Winning the support of local peasants, he drove out the Spanish rulers and handed the conquered south to the king. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was proclaimed king of a united Italy. But the job was not yet finished. One great prize remained outside the new nation, the city of Rome itself. Rome was the seat of the Pope, and it was guarded by French soldiers. For years it stood as the final obstacle to a complete Italy. Garibaldi tried twice to take the city by force, and twice the French troops turned him back. The breakthrough came only in 1870. In that year, France went to war with Prussia and pulled its soldiers out of Rome to fight elsewhere. With the French gone, Italian forces finally marched in, and Rome at last joined the nation as its capital. Yet here is a humbling detail. Most ordinary Italians had no idea that any of this had happened. Illiteracy was widespread across the land. The peasants who had fought alongside Garibaldi had never even heard the word Italia. Some of them believed that L'Italia was simply the name of the king's wife. The nation existed on the map long before it existed in people's hearts. Britain is often held up as the model nation-state, but its story breaks all of our rules. There was no single dramatic revolution, no Bismarck, and no Garibaldi. The British nation was not made in a single moment. It was assembled slowly, over many centuries. Here is the key fact. There was no British nation before the 18th century. The people of the islands did not think of themselves as British. They were English, Welsh, Scottish, or Irish, separate ethnic groups, each with its own culture, language, and traditions. So how did Britain come together? Largely through the growing power of England. As England grew richer and stronger, it extended its grip over its neighbors. The English Parliament became the instrument of this expansion. In 1707, the Act of Union joined England and Scotland into the United Kingdom of Great Britain. But this was less a partnership than a takeover. The new Parliament was dominated by English members. Scotland's distinct culture was deliberately suppressed. After the Scottish Highlanders resisted, they were forbidden to speak their Gaelic language or wear their traditional dress, and many were driven from their homes. Ireland suffered an even harder fate. It was bitterly divided between Catholics and Protestants. England backed the Protestant minority to control the Catholic majority. After a failed revolt in 1798, Ireland was forced into the United Kingdom in 1801. A British identity was built on top of the older nations, promoting English culture, the English language, and symbols like the Union Jack. The older nations survived only as junior partners in the Union. Here is a strange problem. A king is easy to picture. You simply paint his portrait or carve his statue. But how do you draw a nation? A nation is an idea, an abstraction. You cannot photograph it. Artists in this period found a brilliant solution. They turned the nation into a person. Specifically, they painted nations as female figures. This female form was not meant to be any real woman. She was an allegory, a way of expressing an abstract idea through a person or an object. The female figure gave the invisible idea of the nation a body you could see, recognize, and love. Where did this idea come from? During the French Revolution, artists had already used female figures to represent ideals like liberty and justice. Liberty was shown with a red cap and a broken chain. Justice was shown as a blindfolded woman holding a pair of weighing scales. Each idea had its own recognizable symbols. In France, the figure of the nation was named Marion, a common Christian name that signaled a people's nation. Her image was carefully designed. She wore the red cap of liberty and the colors of the tricolor. Statues of Marion stood in public squares, and her face was printed on coins and stamps, so that citizens met their nation every single day. Germany had her own figure, named Germania. She became the living symbol of the German nation, and every detail of her image was a code waiting to be read. She wore a crown of oak leaves because the German oak stood for heroism. A broken chain meant a people being set free. A sword showed a readiness to fight, while an olive branch wrapped around it signaled a willingness to make peace. The symbols went further still. A breastplate marked with an eagle stood for the strength of the German Empire. The rays of a rising sun behind her promised the beginning of a new era. She was often draped in a black, red, and gold flag, the banner of the liberal nationalists of 1848, a flag the German dukes had actually banned. To read Germania correctly was to read the hopes of an entire nation. This was the power of allegory. A single painted woman could carry strength, freedom, courage, peace, and a fresh dawn all at once. The nation could now be seen, felt, and rallied around, even by people who could not read a word. So far, our story has mostly been about liberation. People fought to be free and to rule themselves. But in the final decades of the 19th century, nationalism changed into something darker and far more dangerous. By the last quarter of the century, nationalism lost its generous, liberal spirit. It became narrow and aggressive. Nationalist groups grew intolerant of one another, each convinced of its own superiority and ready to go to war. The great powers, in turn, used these national feelings to fuel their own hunger for empire. The most dangerous flashpoint was a region called the Balkans in southeastern Europe. The Balkans was a land of enormous ethnic variety, home to many peoples broadly known as the Slavs. Much of it was controlled by the crumbling Ottoman Empire. As that empire weakened, its subject peoples broke away one by one, each declaring its independence. These peoples justified their freedom by looking to the past. They used history to argue that they had once been independent nations, only later conquered by foreign powers. So their struggles felt to them like winning back something that had been stolen, a long-lost independence that was rightfully theirs. This created a powder keg. Each new Balkan nation was jealous of the others, all wanting more territory at one another's expense. Worse still, the great European powers circled like vultures. Russia, Germany, Britain, and Austria-Hungary each schemed to control the region and block their rivals. This dangerous mix of local rivalry and great power ambition kept exploding into war. In 1914, it finally helped to trigger the First World War. There is a deep irony in all of this. The European powers loved to display their own national glory. Think of Britannia, the female figure of Britain, painted sitting proudly on top of the globe. Around her were tigers, elephants, and forests, the conquered colonies shown as her possessions. The domination of the world had become a source of national pride. Yet nationalism had another life ahead of it, far from Europe. Across the world, the very peoples colonized by Europe began turning nationalism against their masters. Anti-colonial movements rose everywhere, each one struggling to build its own independent nation-state. These movements did not simply copy Europe. People everywhere created their own forms of nationalism, shaped by their own histories and struggles. India's own freedom movement was one of them. But the core idea, that the world should be organized into nation-states, had become accepted as natural and universal. The idea born in France had conquered the globe. The second half of our story reveals a hard truth about nations. Germany and Italy were not united by dreamers, but by armies, wars, and shrewd politicians. Britain was assembled slowly, with England steadily absorbing its neighbors. Artists gave these nations a human face, while the Balkans showed how nationalism could turn poisonous and lead to war. Carry this one idea with you. Nationalism was never a single thing. It could liberate people, and it could destroy them. The same force that freed nations from kings would later drive them into the deadliest war the world had yet seen. The dream Soryu painted in 1848 had finally come true, but reality, as always, proved far more complicated than the dream.